DISC is a personality test, and I don't like calling it that. I prefer like communication tool. It broadens your horizons so much when it comes to just developing relationships, skills with people, and pushing yourself to stretch into different areas of priority in life that you wouldn't normally have a natural inclination to, that we can't use it to put people in buckets. It's really smart of us to add these things to our back pocket as communication strategy, but you don't want to just start pigeonholing people into, because you're a fast decision maker and you're results driven, you're right all the time. The nature of it is that you are born and designed to be comfortable in a very specific personality capacity. How you choose to behave is very different. So identifying those things about yourself, having an awareness around those things, how you get to show up and how you choose to behave based on what you know about yourself, but also learning about other personality types and what they need. I think almost that's the more important side of it too, is that you get to show up with other people's needs better prepared. The things that hold you back, those are probably the most important things for you to know. Like that is a mirror. That's something I know that's hard. It's something I know that I can develop. And vision without action is fantasy, and action without vision is chaos. If we have vision, but we can't execute, there's a problem. That's a fantasy. Like we're not ever going to get to the end result.
All right, welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craik, and today I'm super excited. I have a longtime friend of mine here, Kristi Gerl. Kristi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good.
Finally, after all of our coffee talks about it.
We've had so many talks about it, and you're doing some super cool work, which I'm fascinated by. And before we get into like the work that you're doing, though, can you tell the audience a little bit about like who you are? Because I know you, but they don't know you.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I mean, I am just a mom and a businesswoman and a career, enthusiast, and I love people. We'll talk about a little bit about the work that I'm doing, but my passion has kind of led me to develop people in my career. A lot of business optimization I do, but just all facets of management, leadership, and kind of pushed me to personal growth and development, which is like right up, I know, your alley. We talked about it a lot. I mean, there's not much to me other than, just really pushing myself all the time in both personal and professional life, which I love to do. Yeah.
Well, you're very humble. It's like, I'm just a mom. I'm just a business person, but like, I mean, the work that you're doing is really, really incredible. You've told me a lot about it, and I know you personally as well. And so we'll take that just word out because you're a lot of incredible things. So no,
that's good to remember too. I need to remember that.
That's good.
It's a passion project for me, all of this, which is really cool. And so I'm super excited to talk about it because it's not just something that comes along with like a job. It's something that you seek out. You push for growth, and this just happens to be something I can share with people, which is fantastic. So
it's so cool.
Yeah.
And I know how you feel too. I feel that way in my business, where I'm like, I often think of my business as like, it's just a passion project, almost like, because like the things I'm doing, I love. It's I
want to love what I do, and I'm getting there, but I always joke, like, even mentors I have in my life that are quite a bit older than me, 15 years, and I'm not as spring chicken anymore, but I'm like, I want to be them when I grow up. I'm always just looking at how can I push myself further, because I'm not where I want to be yet, and in that full passion like mode for my life. But this is like going to take me there, I think. So, or part of it for sure.
So talk a little bit just about like your journey professionally and like where you are now, but like how you got to where you are now too.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like I started out in a healthcare degree and ended up pivoting really quickly into dentistry. So I went to dental assisting school in 2008, and that it's a short, really jam-packed program, but it allowed me to stay in the healthcare industry while kind of being connected with people, which is what I wanted to do. So customer service as well. And then through that, I learned a lot of mechanics when it came to actual like dentistry, and that was really cool. So I kind of had this like fork in the road moment where I was like, do I go into, administration and management, or do I lean into maybe going back to school and doing dentistry and becoming a dentist? And so I did choose the management path because it worked for my family and 2 young kids, and kind of just grew through a couple of different businesses into management, kind of a natural leadership, which we'll talk about why with, my personality and, my tendencies, but as well, multi-clinic management, and then just learning business optimization, efficiencies, just kind of a passion again for learning how to push myself and make everybody around me better. Currently, I am a regional manager for a corporate company that assists with business optimization, but that includes training and systems and, KPI measurement and things like that. But I'm also a coach and a mentor on the side with all of my free time, consulting where I can, and then doing my DISC certification, which was a while ago now, but super excited to continue just this, like I said, passion project. That's kind of where I've come in my, 18 years of dentistry and healthcare. Yeah.
It's so cool because I find it's like no matter what role we end up in, we still it's like we have this like internal compass, which we'll kind of talk about, that still just like pulls you towards certain things. Like you talked about customer service and like leadership and those types of things. I think certain people just have that pull for those things, and it's like it's almost like no matter what field you go into, you find yourself falling into those kind of roles. Is that what you feel? Yeah,
I do. I mean, I think I've always felt that in like even going back to like being in school and stuff like that, right? Like the, socialization that I enjoyed, or the team sports that I preferred versus individual, and how this topic really lends to giving a label to the things, the tendencies that people have, and going all the way back to kind of like you said, when you were younger, and just kind of coming home to your comfort zone. Right? Yeah.
So you mentioned the DISC certification. So let's get into that. Like tell people, what is this DISC?
So DISC is a personality test. And I don't like calling it that. I prefer like communication tool, because when you add it to your tool belt, it broadens your horizons so much when it comes to just developing relationships, skills with people, difficult things, and pushing yourself to stretch into different areas of priority in life that you wouldn't normally have a natural inclination to. So DISC was developed. You can't trademark a personality test. There's lots of iterations of it. My kids have come home from school and they said, I took a test and I'm a lion. And I'm like, sure you are, sweetie, or I'm blue, or I'm green. Like there's so many of them out there. And what I love about all of them really is just, it's about knowing yourself, knowing other people, or identifying those things in other people, and then figuring out how to work to build better communication and give people what they need in communication. DISC itself started very early, actually in the 1920s. I believe there was a psychologist, Dr. William Moulton Marsden, that wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People, just starting to identify kind of 4 main types of people and their tendencies based on different stimuli, he called them. So stressors and motivators in life, and the tendencies that these kind of 4 groups of people had to their responses to these stimuli. So what do people do when they're asked for action? Are you a fast decision maker, or are you a slow decision maker? Are you more likely to question a concept or, a group of people versus having buy-in and empathy and collaboration and things like that? So I do this kind of hand motion because there's like a vertical and horizontal measurement axis. As this test started to develop, 1950s, 1970s, it became kind of a rough rubric of adjectives that describe people. And then you could pick what adjective most described you, and kind of started to put people in these buckets of priorities or tendencies. And then again, closer to the 1970s, when the company that does the certification, the Wiley Group, kind of purchased this whole concept of a personality profiling system, labeled it DISC, and started creating the rubric in a more comprehensive way. Like, you took the test, that was like a 25 or 30-minute test. And what I love about it so much is that it's so scientifically based. Like every question you took had a mathematical equation where the number assigned to the answer was measured on a scale in comparison to where we know people typically fall when they answer these tests. And what's nice too is that it's reliable. Like, so they constantly go back to how reliable is this test, and is it testing what we're asking it to test, right? So 5% of respondents, only 5% of respondents are not typically aligned with the results that they get. So that's a pretty low number when it comes to something that we talk about personality, which is really conceptual, but it actually is really data driven. And so that's kind of one of my favorite parts of it, even though that's not one of my priorities in life, is that accuracy and things like that.
Yeah.
But DISC in and of itself will, when you do that test, will put a dot somewhere in this circle. And the circle is identifies the 4 kind of buckets of people that we were talking about. D for dominance, I for influence, S for steadiness, and C for conscientiousness. And we'll have to put up some resources because the visual is really interesting. The top of the circle, the D's and the I's, so D would kind of be on the top left and I on the top right. Those are really external processors. I don't know if I would say extrovert, but external processors, really quick decision makers. And then the D personality has priorities, or this kind of circumplex where it's a map basically of where your test results would place you. And the map has priorities listed around it. And typically where you fall in this map, your priorities as a natural tendency fall very similar to somebody who else might fall within the same kind of personality type or profile. The thing I want to identify about DISC too, and not just the tool that it is, but that we can't use it to put people in buckets, right? It's really smart of us to add these things to our back pocket as communication strategy, but you don't want to just start pigeonholing people into, because you're a fast decision maker and you're results driven, you're right all the time because you're confident, versus somebody who is a slower decision maker, more questioning and methodical, but prefers accuracy. They're not going to be as loud about those ideas potentially. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting people in a box, basically, and understanding the difference between personality and behavior. So you might have these tendencies that, I'm going to tell everybody like you were an I or an SI, right?
Yeah, I have mine here. I'll see if, I don't know if people are watching, they might be able to see some of the visual that you were talking about if I hold it up. But
yeah, that kind of circle. Yeah. So on the bottom half of the circle, like I said, those kind of more internal processors, that S on the bottom right, the C on the bottom left, S's will tend to be a little bit more empathetic and, people oriented. There's strengths and weaknesses that come with each kind of profile. But when it comes to behavior, because you're an SI, you have tendencies like collaboration, steadiness, and you also want to make sure that everybody's happy when you're around. Yeah. So, but your behavior, just because you fall there as a tendency, your education and your experience and your maturity lends you to stretch into the other personality types, which allows us to not be kept in one box or one bucket. And all of us have these experiences that lend to kind of how we approach communication and strategy around, personality and things like that. But we were talking a couple of days ago about the nature versus nurture, of this. And, the nature of it is that you are born and designed to be comfortable in a very specific personality capacity. How you choose to behave is very different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally does. Yeah. And it's interesting because like talking about putting people in buckets and stuff, like I think in all types of relationships, whether it's professional, whether it's romantic, friendship, whatever it is, there's these two concepts I think that people grapple with, where some people are like, no, I have to find somebody who's just like me to work with, to partner with, to be in a relationship with. Or we have this, no, opposites attract. I need somebody who like fulfills these other areas. But the cool thing when we were talking about it, and as we kind of like navigated through even just discussing kind of my results, It's like, well, no, it's not actually about that. It's more about just your own self-awareness and how, like, what are your natural tendencies, and then how do you use that to better your relationships with somebody who's maybe more over here on the scale and those types of things.
Well, and the education is like we had talked about again, like just that holding up that mirror to being like, whoa, that really is me. You know, and like I remember when you did it and you texted me and you were like, I just feel really called out right now.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not something that I would say is normally, I don't know if you agree with this. I wasn't really shocked by the results, but it just labeled things that I was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess. But then you have this awareness, and same thing with the other personality types that aren't yours, learning about those people. So it's about identifying those things about yourself, having an awareness around those things, how you get to show up and how you choose to behave based on what you know about yourself, but also learning about other personality types and what they need. I think almost that's the more important side of it too, is that you get to show up with other people's needs better prepared to meet them, I guess, is kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's there's certain things on here that like feel really good. And then there's certain things where you're like, it's not like you don't like it, but it, like you said, it holds up this mirror and it forces you to reflect on situations in life, right? Like I'll give an example. Like the first, it talks about like your SI story, right? So I'll just read the first sentence here. So it says, because you have SI style, Kyle, you're probably a very friendly person who reaches out to others with your warmth and sincerity. You tend to be empathetic and you're driven by desire to like and be liked. You're quick to offer a smile and make an effort to get to know people personally. So like that's something to me is like, I read that, I'm like, yeah, that feels good. That reflects who I want to be, right? But then there's also, let's see. Like others with the SI style, you may tie your sense of self-worth to the approval of others, and you probably have a fear of letting people down. As a result, you may strive to meet everyone's expectations, and you probably feel bad if you think someone is disappointed with you. At the same time, you want to know when you have done a good job, and while you probably seek out public recognition, you do appreciate genuine praise. And then there's a part down here. It says, you're often able to overlook people's personality quirks and weaknesses, so others probably look forward to working with you. However, you may have found that you're so accepting that you get yourself into trouble by trusting people who don't deserve it, right? So it's like there's these contrastive things here where you're like, oh, I love that side of me that's like super empathetic and like that resonates really deeply with me, but then it forces you to reflect also on like, yeah, but oftentimes that gets me in trouble too.
Well, yeah. And when we kind of first started talking about this, and you had brought up the concept of these priorities. So like I said, when you're mapped, you fall into one of the profiles, one of the 4 profiles of people. Then you have these priorities, and the measurement tool that the test actually has places you either closer to the center or closer to the outside of the circle. And that actually just indicates your inclination towards the tendencies that you have. So again, kind of coming back to that circle, I think on that document there's on the outside of the circle there. And again, that's why it's so interesting. It's so simplistic in its model, but there are words that are listed around the circle. And it's so funny how many times I've seen people do this test. Like your priorities are enthusiasm, collaboration, and support as an SI personality. Yeah. And so just saying those words out loud, those probably resonate with you. But you had asked me about, well, if they're strengths of mine, if they're natural tendencies, do I lean into that? And I just think you already do them very well. And that's where your comfort zone is. But we've talked a lot in our kind of just coffee chats about growth and where that happens. And I truly feel like it's when you're learning about other styles and pushing yourself to step outside of these priorities that you naturally come with. Like the tendency to, for yourself, challenge things a little bit more, or, make a fast decision to get good results, that kind of thing, and accepting a failure with that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that's harder for certain personality types to venture into the growth side of things? Like, because we talked about this 80-20, right? That's what you said to me when we were talking about that was, I think How did you say it? Do you remember?
Yeah, I really have this theory in life that I do 75% of what I do very uncomfortable. Not necessarily everything, but like work, for example, because I just enjoy pushing myself so much, or growth, in life. I want to be uncomfortable. That's where the biggest change happens. So put 20% of your energy into the priorities that are easy for you. You will always need those as a fallback, because we have to have success in our life in order to feel accomplished, especially us people and the ones that want to tie ourselves to, like, you're right, that's a call out. Like, I'm the same way. I'm a true I, like right on the edge of the circle. I tie myself very aggressively to people's buy-ins because I'm an influence personality style. So if I lose buy-in, it's devastating. But 80% of my energy, and again, not all the time, sometimes that flips, but a good majority of my time is spent pushing myself into other personality styles. The stretch is what they call it, so that I know that I can show up for other people the way that they need me to. And it becomes easier. But what's interesting about even the results that you get, so the actual documentation that comes with this test will tell you where we're forecast that you will spend the most energy. And I don't think it's hard for one particular personality style. I think it's just hard for everybody who doesn't have tendencies or priorities that fall in kind of outside that kind of umbrella that's painted in that circumflex there. But again, just coming back to the fact that like my experience and your experience are different, it might be easier for me to say, and I have actually additional priorities. So when you take this test, we talked about how like some people are like, oh, I'd be a totally different person if I took this test 10 years ago. Yeah. You actually wouldn't. Yeah. Statistically, it's very similar. You might be a little bit off, but your natural tendencies stay very similar. But I have additional priorities listed on my test now that actually drive into action and results. From the I, I'm more into the D, because in my professional life as a leader and a manager, it has not served me to be such a people pleaser. I have to be results driven. I have to measure things. I have to hold people accountable. That is very difficult for me. Very difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. And like what you said about doing it like 10 years later. And so I was just sharing this story with you as well. Yeah. Like really like actually closely to when you sent me this test, I had a friend who sent me another personality test, which was kind of more of just like, we'll call it like one of the basic ones. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And, but so I did this test and the results came out and it said I was like, I leaned into being extroverted and I was a campaigner, I think is what it called me. And I was sitting there and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I've grown so much in life. Like I genuinely feel like I'm a different person than I was even 2 years ago. And so I was like, I had said to this friend, I'm like, oh, that's funny. I've taken this exact same test. Like I remember taking it. And I said, I remember like, I'm so different now. Like it was completely different results. So it's interesting. And then I got curious. So I went back and found it in my email from like 3 years ago. And I was like, oh, damn. I'm like, I haven't grown at all. It was like my first instinct. I'm like, I actually was also a campaigner there. I still leaned into extroverted. And so it was super interesting. But the thing is like, I've stepped more into the growth side of things away from my tendencies.
Well, I would argue that just because it's the same doesn't mean that you're acting the same. Yeah. So again, that's personality versus behavior. Yeah, yeah. You have the same priorities in life, the same tendencies that you were born with, but the nurture part of this versus the nature is that you have allowed yourself to grow in those areas. Our reaction to the stimuli, to the stressors that come, to the motivators that we have, and how we perform or change how we show up. And that's in, like you said, personal, professional, any relationship, any task that we're doing. But yeah, I would argue that like I would feel the same way. I thought I was going to be taking this and being a high D personality versus when I first took this test, I think I was an IS. So still just exceptionally close to where I am now, but I now have additional priorities. I have stretch because that growth in my behavior has pushed me into those areas that are really uncomfortable. They're still uncomfortable. Yeah. If I'm being honest, like it just doesn't feel natural. Yeah. to me. Whereas I think when we encounter people with other personality types, we tend to make assumptions about those personality types because of how we would show up. And so that's the interesting part about learning about others. So I keep saying, like, I'm going to reference D because it really is, it's a small percentage of the population that are D personality. They're direct. They value, you know, their priorities are action, results, and challenge. So these are people in your life, and you're going to think of people right now that are very direct. There's not a lot of emotion or fluff. They come off, you know, really confident or aggressive sometimes. Assertive is probably a better word. And, you know, they tend to get their own way a lot. And the reason that I use this as an example is because it's probably the most easily identifiable for people in their life. And so when you go to see somebody like that in that personality style, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. It just means that they're confident. And when we assume that they're being aggressive, when really from their perspective, based on their motivators, they are actually showing up with, first of all, they're thinking, I've got a fast idea that I think can fix this immediately. I'm just going to throw it out there for everybody. I'll fix this. Right? Like, how funny is it to change the perspective on the position that they're coming from when we think, like, as a people person, I'm just like, why you gotta be so mean? Yeah. Like, why can't you be nice to me? Put a little fluff on that.
Why can't you, like, listen to everybody else first?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, because, like, they're genuinely thinking, like, this is easy. I'm going to fix it. Here's an answer for you. Let's just do it.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective shift, because when we think about even the language around leadership today, like, you look on LinkedIn and look at anything around leadership, the message is different. Like, it's shifted to, like, leaders need to be, and I don't disagree with a lot of this, but like, leaders need to be compassionate. Like, I hear all the time, like, a good leader listens to everybody else first. But from the sounds of, like, what you're saying there, it's like, well, it depends. Different people just show up differently, but that leader still needs to be able to adapt and adjust to their group.
That's the stretch for sure.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's really important that we have every personality type in our lives, like, speaking to our problems in our relationships, you know, in our professional setting. Like, people are always like, hey, should I use this as a hiring tool? And I'm like, absolutely not, because this doesn't dictate how people behave. It's just kind of their natural tendencies. So then I also coach people on, like, okay, well, how do I then utilize my team members who have these personality types, right? And there's lots of strategy around that. So your internal processors, say you show up to, like, a team meeting or a family meeting or whatever, and you know that you have an internal processor, an S or a C in your group, or maybe a couple of them. Those people are not going to have space to speak. You're going to have your D's and your I's because we're super excited about things. You know, I'm all about getting buy-in. And, like, somebody asked me the other day, I did a training session. Again, I'm like 17 and a half years into doing what I'm doing. And someone was like, did you used to be a cheerleader? And I was like, I should have. Like, but, like, it's just kind of, this is how I show up, my energy, right? But those S's and C's in that setting, as a leader or as a person, just a team member, if you don't prepare space for them and tell them in advance because they need time, we really aren't giving them the opportunity to add their value in a space like that, right? So that's just like one example of how, even just in a professional setting, you can show up, or a personal setting, you can show up to a group of people, and knowing that other people are going to need more time or advanced notice because quick things are uncomfortable. You know, when we were talking about leaning into your tendencies as being strengths, like, I have the ability to get buy-in and influence. It's something that I really value, but that can be a lot for some people. So I know that there are spaces that I need to show up with a lot less than what I would normally bring to the table. But that's a learning curve too, right? Like, I've been in failure moments like that and being like, why are these people not happy with how I'm showing up? Like, I'm all optimism.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all
I know that people are like toxic positivity.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that too, because I don't believe in being toxically positive, but tragically optimistic is how I phrase it, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, like, I know that things are not always going to be happy, but I get to choose to show up positively. However, that is my natural tendency. So I don't have a hard time doing that.
Yeah.
You know, like we've gone through a lot in our lives in the last year and a half, just by coincidence, simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I still really felt like the energy that we both brought to that table was like, hey, like this has been super shitty, but how do we move forward? I mean, a lot of people don't come to the table like that.
Yeah. It's super interesting. And my mind keeps going back to, I could totally see you as a cheerleader too.
Yeah, probably. I should have.
Yeah.
That's not what we do in Canada though. They're just not
true.
as good.
That's true. Yeah. No, I'm super interested in this. And like, so if we can use mine as an example, just since we have it and we've just recently kind of like talked about it. So how does somebody like me, I want to just kind of highlight the picture of how somebody takes this knowledge that they now have and take it into their life and use it. So how does somebody like me take that information of being this like SI personality and utilize that to better my relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's personal, whatever those relationships might be? How do I use it to better my experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that you can do that. Like, I think I told you this, like I took this test and it was like a very cursory version of it. It was just like a list of adjectives that I circled. Again, it's all out there. Like anybody can take it, but this comprehensive one, it just gives you lots of info. But I took it in 2010 or 2009 and it changed my life. It changed the perspective that I had. It helped me develop EQ. So I would lean into the learning side of this. So educate yourself, allow the positive things that you're seeing to be like really reinforcing. I think that those are really cool to be like, yeah, I am like that. Like those are things I'm great at, you know? But also then, like I said, spend a lot of energy into learning the other personality types and then start identifying them. Like I said, none of this is groundbreaking. Like a lot of it seems like common sense. Like when I walk in and I used to use this tool to personality profile patients. So patients would walk in or we'd be on a phone call with them, new patients. And within 5 minutes, you should really, they're pretty indicative when you start to learn kind of the top 3 priorities for each. Are really simple. And this is the EQ. It's just practicing, right? So if I'm starting to say, okay, that person's a D, it's really easy then for me to say, here's how I shift to show up. So, you know, I have patients that I used to personality profile as a C. They're conscientious, so they value accuracy. They're challenging and skeptical, and they need stability as well. These are the people in your life that want all the information about everything. They're asking all the questions. They need to spend a lot of time considering things. They often, again, internal processors. If they're in the work environment, they want to work by themselves. So again, I think when you're asking about how do you take it, so an SI, I think we talked about this, even just the things that hold you back, those are probably the most important things for you to know, because then you can work on the things that you know will hold you back. What's tough for you is, even though collaboration and enthusiasm are like big priorities for you, it might make it difficult for you to make a decision because you're worried about what everybody else is thinking, their feelings, right? And like, while that's a great quality to have, how do you push yourself into a more, I want to act, or this is the decision I'm going to make? Like, you should tell the story about the podcast, because I thought, how funny is that example?
Oh yeah, like so we were talking before we went on air about just like imposter syndrome kind of came up a little bit, and I was like, you know, when I first started the podcast, I wanted to start a podcast for a long time, and I didn't think I was interesting enough to host a 1 hour or even a 30-minute episode of just me talking about stuff, which is interesting because I knew I had a lot to give. I knew I had a lot of knowledge and experience to offer to people, but it was that imposter syndrome. And so the co-host that I had at the beginning, I reached out to him, is Dr. Riley Anderson. He's a naturopathic doctor. He was doing work with my company, and I was like, hey, I've had this idea to host a podcast. I really want to do it. Do you want to do it with me? And that gave us this ability to have conversations, which made it a lot easier for me. And funny enough, like I really had a lot of fun doing that, but it was easy for me to be creative in that moment.
Yeah.
And then when he wanted to venture away from it, like I wanted to keep going with it. And so I just decided, well, I'll just bring on guests.
Yeah, you created a space where you were still collaborating with people because that's where you find a lot of like natural comfort, right? And so when you said that, I was like, oh, is it because you were collaborating?
Yeah.
and people were involved?
Yeah. But it's funny too, 'cause I can't remember if we kind of spoke about this, but like I've recognized it more and more even in the last few years where I've had times in my business, I've had times where I've had a team and I've had times where I didn't have a team where I'm just solo. Like right now, I'm more of like a solopreneur in my business. But I struggle with that a lot of the times. Like I hate when I spend like a week where I'm just sitting on my computer and like just working on the business.
Yeah.
Like I like working on the business, but you feel useless. You feel like I haven't accomplished anything. But then I'll go and sit at a coffee shop for a day and work, and I feel like I've done the same amount of work, but I feel like I've accomplished so much more. And it's that like being around people and
you're just part of something.
Yeah.
And because like that I tendency, and I'm the exact same way, is like we are people. And so our batteries are full in social environments. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be working with someone beside you. In order for me to actually be really invested in something, I do want more than just myself involved in it.
Yeah.
And like you said about working in a coffee shop and feeling, but it's just like you're in something social. You're in an environment where there's people. My battery gets full by spending time with people and talking, and whereas there's like this other whole half of the circle of people that want to be on their own. They prefer it, or their battery gets full by spending time internally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so funny.
Essentially, I just had like this like major realization in my life while you were talking about that. It's so funny. I'm happy to share it, but like when you're just thinking about that, and even thinking back to like my marriage and how I always had this desire to be like this family business. Right, where like we did it together, and I pushed that in my relationship a lot, and it's a reflection that I had to come away from that relationship with, even in terms of like being the coach in a relationship, which I think a lot of people have experienced, where like one person's trying to coach the other person in a relationship. That's like a tendency as somebody who wants to collaborate with people. Yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting thing that came up for me when you were talking about that.
Well, and we talked a little bit about how, like, even with these tools, and like I said, I mean, I've been using this for 14 years to identify needs in other people, to develop my own stretch, a tool to ensure that I'm showing up better every time I go into a difficult conversation. That's never led me to perfection, because I only get to control 50% of that. And so, and regardless, like people are so nuanced, and every aspect of this is just, like I said, just a tool to develop kind of a really simplistic way of what needs are for people or priorities, but they get to decide how they show up. And when we talk about our marriages and, coming away from that relationship and knowing that that's, I don't want to say a failure, but more of like that's something that I couldn't get through even with tools like this. And so the growth from that, and even leaning into what tendencies did I have, like you're identifying, there's a mirror there for sure when things don't work out, even though you're developing the skills to show up the way that you think other people need. But being the coach though, that's a really powerful phrase to me, because that's hard. And that's something that I had to recognize, like in all relationships in my life, like even with just like family members and friends, that I have that tendency. And once I have the awareness of like, oh, that's my tendency to want to like fix it, to want to like jump in. Now that I have that awareness, I do find it's easier for me to sit back more and be like, oh, okay, I recognize that's my tendency. That's not necessarily what they want from me. And so you have to become a better listener and become more intuitive of like, what are their needs here? And how do if I want to be that fixer, if I want to be that coach, I need to adjust my style for that person. Yeah, for sure. Well, and even developing coaching skills, like that's it's really interesting there's definitely a ton of different coaching styles, right? And some of the coaching styles are, what do you want to accomplish? Okay, here are 3 ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
But I actually prefer a more natural,
like client-centered.
Yeah, like you're telling me what you want to accomplish, but I'm going to ask you 25 different questions because I wonder if that's what's actually motivating you, right? And then if that isn't what's motivating you, what are you going to lean into, maybe even within your natural priorities, that are going to help us accomplish things? Like what of that can we use in the positive way? And then what of that is going to be really difficult? Like, where can we identify those roadblocks ahead of time? That is hard for me to sit and be like, I'm going to ask you all these questions because I want to get to the bottom of your motivators. I'm like you. I'm like, I can see a lot. And that's intuition, that's EQ. Again, you can have an I personality that doesn't have EQ, or this type of education or experience with people. And then you're just a cheerleader that's really bulldozing people without any awareness, right?
Yeah.
So leaning into almost the most uncomfortable parts of this, like I keep saying, that 80% where you're like, that is a mirror. That's something I know that's hard. It's something I know that I can develop and continue to kind of beta test in relationship, right? Trial and error, the failures of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I have this coaching kind of mantra that I keep in my head where like I approach it in a way that, let me be the guide, like the tour guide for you to the place that you already have been. Right. And that's how I try to approach my coaching style with clients, and even with like my martial arts students now, and even my relationships. It's like, if I'm going to help you, let me help you explore the things that you've already experienced. Like, explore the things you already know what you need in life. Let me help you navigate it. Versus like, let me give you the answers. When I was a personal trainer or something. No, you need to do this workout, follow this nutrition plan, and you will get this result. It didn't work for a lot of people because I don't have the answers.
I read this quote that was super powerful. It's just something that stuck with me because it lends to like so many parts of this. And once you're immersed in this stuff, like I am, when you're talking, I'm literally thinking just DISC, like all the time. It's like takes over, which is great, but also like I need to step out of it. But I read a quote that said, vision without action is fantasy, and action without vision is chaos. And so when we're coaching people, or when we're trying to apply these personality kind of identifiers, or how we get to show up, I think identifying that if we have vision but we can't execute, there's a problem. That's chaos, or that's a fantasy. Like we're not ever going to get to the end result. So when we're coaching people, or when we're developing ourselves, or knowing that, how do we lean into the stretch, or take the positives from other personality styles to push ourselves to those actions if we're not naturally, inclined. Opposite, if we have action without vision, that's like the D's and the I's who are like, let's just do it. And then if it fails, I mean, there's a whole Kaizen theory there, right? Like if it fails, then we fix it, then we, but some people are more comfortable with that. Like failure, big fan. But it's my natural tendency is to take action, learn from it, and move on. Whereas that might be really hard for somebody who's a true C or an S, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Can you say that quote one more time?
So it's vision without action is fantasy. Action without vision is chaos.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is powerful.
Right?
Yeah.
It just kind of stuck with me as far like, and again, when this just kind of weaves its way through my entire life. And that's why I like to call this tool. It's just a constant tool for assessment. Where am I? Where are you? And how do I make this work for you? Because again, I only show up 50% of the conversation or the communication, right?
Yeah.
And so I get to say, like, where am I?
Yeah.
And where are you? And what if this is difficult for me? I still encounter personality types. I can tell you which ones they are for sure. It's like those true Ds that have like, really no stretch. You can tell when people haven't really worked on the stretch. And I have a hard time getting buy-in or influence from those people. It makes me shut down a little bit. And so I know when I go into conversation with those people, I have to like mentally prepare myself for difficult. I have to like map out our conversations sometimes still.
Yeah. You have to like anticipate what like the attitude that they're bringing to the conversation. Attitude's maybe not the right word, but
yeah, what I think anticipation of their desired outcome is typically kind of how I look at it, right?
Those are people who haven't like exercised that stretch enough, right? Because it's not like it's really easy to, like we talked about before, to pigeonhole somebody and be like, this is just who they are. This is the type of person. It's like, well, no, they just haven't like exercised that ability to, I don't even want to say, I like the word stretch even more than the word grow, because that has a negative connotation to it of like, this person isn't willing to grow. Well, no, they just haven't practiced it.
Yeah, it's
much.
A skill.
It's
a total skill. And that's why I think the DISC model is interesting, is because it's actually so simplistic in how it's presented. And yet there's so many complexities to how you utilize it.
And I think people, or at least one thing that I recognize is we talked about how that stretching can be uncomfortable. But I've recognized in my life anyways that when I do like look at like those D kind of behaviors and stuff like when I exercise those things, it actually does feel good. It is uncomfortable, but it does feel good. Like growth does feel good. For the most part, even though it is uncomfortable. Yeah,
it's the kind of benefit of, like you said, that good feeling of growth is like there is reward.
Yeah.
And when you get better with communication and better with people, the reward is exponential. It really is. Yeah. That's why I just like have this crazy passion about like making sure that people start to lean into like developing these skills.
Yeah.
You know?
It's cool.
Yeah.
I had a friend recently, actually just yesterday, messaged me and they said, would you rather live one life for 1,000 years, or would you rather live 10 lives for 100 years each? And I like really struggle with this question, and I went into classic Kyle overthinking mode. I was like, I'm like, I don't know. And the way that I approached it, I said, I think I would rather, I can't even actually remember how I answered it, but I know my train of thought was like, if I lived, they said to me they would live 10 lives for 100 years each, because then they could live 10 different lives. I said, I don't even know if I would be able to be a different person if I showed up in if this me showed up I got another chance at life, would I do anything differently? Would I even have the capacity to be a different person? Because like my natural instincts would be still to be this like empathetic, compassionate, people-pleasing kind of person, right? It's like you can continue to try and grow through life.
Yeah, but your environment, again, that there's a lot more factors that play into it. Like, again, you have this natural tendency, your priorities in life as a person are pretty set.
Yeah.
However, you know, whether you went to university or went into a trade really dictates kind of how those things are applied in life. And so I immediately am able to, I'm a fast decision maker. I want to live 10 lives for 100 years, because even though I have these natural tendencies, the experience and the education and whatever what would be in that next life would put me in a position to not necessarily show up differently, but behave differently. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that insight. Yeah. Okay, so I have a fun thing for you. So I always get my last guest to write a question for my next guest.
Okay.
And so I'm going to read the question to you. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
And then you can answer it, and then I'll give you an opportunity after we're off air. You can write a question for my next guest.
Fun. Okay.
You up for it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's make sure I got the right question here. Okay. Okay. What has forgiveness looked like for you in the past? Is it easy or hard for you?
Interesting. Forgiveness is really easy for me. And like just coming back to kind of the conversation we're having, like I am a people person and a pleaser. Trust is never really needing to be earned with me. Can you read that again?
Of course,
I just want to make sure I'm answering it. What does it look like?
What has forgiveness looked like for you in the past, and is it easy or hard for you?
Oh, interesting. So it's easy for me, but I would say that in the past it has looked like I will say that it is there, and I will give it very readily and still deal with the consequences of the pain that the action caused by myself, because I don't want my negative emotions to affect other people. I would say now forgiveness looks different. I need to understand that I truly have gone through the things that I need to go through to process before I can give that forgiveness. And that's me, a recovering people pleaser, trying to be more true to myself and take care of myself.
Yeah.
Well, that's such a good question.
Yeah, it's such a good answer too.
Thank you.
I resonate with your answer quite a bit. I remember, I know we're going to wrap up soon here, but I remember being in therapy and talking about trust in therapy. And I said, I always am the type of person where like, you have my trust until you don't, like until you, and through that conversation with my therapist, they kind of shifted my perspective on it. They're like, but like, why do you feel like everybody deserves your trust?
Right? It's interesting. I was talking with someone about dating, and we were talking about like male, female, and how we show up to dating like differently. I don't know that it's necessarily gender specific, but more maybe two different types of people. And it kind of lends to this trust aspect. Some people show up to dating with 100. The bucket is already full. And then the person, when they start to disappoint you, we're taken away from that 100. And I think women tend to do that a lot. Like, I want so much out of this. And then, checks, down now where it's 50 and this isn't going to go great. I'm disappointed. Whereas other people, typically men, and again, I'm just generalizing. I have no data to back this up whatsoever, just life experience. But what a better way to show up to dating if you were at 0 and you allowed people to build trust, to impress you, to show up with needs that you identified beforehand, and build to 100 instead, not necessarily 100. Nobody's going to be everything for you. Yeah. But just kind of a similar concept that you're right. Why does everybody deserve our trust right away, or forgiveness right away until we're ready, or our bar is so high, our expectations are so high, and then we kind of become disappointed. I don't think it's a bad thing. This is the optimism that we talked about.
But it's an interesting symmetry to even the DISC model of like going into these interactions and relationships without this expectation that people have to show up ready for me, or people have to show up and like respond to my personality. It's just a matter of, no, let's go in and let's have this curiosity with each other and see where it goes. Kind of thing.
I think like all encompassing what DISC has been able to do for me is made me show up to walk the communication path in a different perspective. I know how I can show up and how I communicate. And again, that's been a helpful kind of navigating my own story. But it's more important that I get to walk those steps with the other types of people that are coming to the table that I'm unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it's a collective.
Yeah,
we're stronger together. All those personality types together. Yeah. Awesome. This has been so fun. We could talk. I know we could talk for hours and hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. Maybe we do it again if you had fun. So
no, it's great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. It was a long time in the making, I feel like, and I was so excited to have you on. So
Well, I was a little nervous, but I'm really glad we did it.
Oh, you're natural.